hold hands and close your eyes. It's midnight, and you're listening to the Ghost Story Guys. Welcome to the Ghost Story Guys. I'm Brennan Storr.
I'm Paul Bestall.
And this is a show where we talk about spooks, specters, and all the other things watching us from the shadows beyond the campfire. Some conversations only make sense after the sun has set, and this is most definitely one. Thanks for tuning in. This is episode number 208, and we're coming to you from that tiny mountain cabin you dream about, but can never quite reach. Paul Bestall, my friend, how you doing?
I'm all right, my friend. I've just been chuckling today as I've seen some news that would once again force you to stay away from the ocean.
Oh, no. Well, I didn't really need any convincing, but do tell.
On Saturday, there was a young Chilean guy called Adrian who's gone for a paddle with his father in the Straits of Magellan, paddling along. Obviously, they've got the GoPros going. They're having a great time. Until all of a sudden, underneath Adrian, up pops a humpback whale and swallows him whole, boat and everything. And luckily, after 2 seconds, he thought, bleh, and spat him back out. And he was released with no injuries, but what a tale to tell.
A whale of a tale, if you will.
Hey, absolutely. And it's all on video. So if you Google it, you will be able to see Adrian swallowed live by a giant humpback whale who clearly didn't like the taste of his kayak.
All right, well, I'm going to look.
Chili, kayak, whale. Try those keywords.
All right, so I am... Oh, Lord. Oh, that happens so fast. And it just spits him. Wow, I just feel like something so monumental should take more time.
Yeah.
I got to say, he's just standing there very calmly telling the story. I would be in a padded room like Magneto. I'm going to be carrying this nightmare with me. I got tickets to see the new Captain America after we finish recording tonight. All I'm going to be thinking about as I watch Sam take on the forces of fascism is this poor bastard being eaten by a whale.
Be very much like Iron Man defending New York in the first Avengers film, where he flies inside one of the Chitauri monsters and blows it up from the inside.
At least he knew that he had rockets to defend himself. Poor Adrian there. All he had was Jesus on his side.
Plus, I'm not sure humpback whale could have swallowed him anyway. I don't think they've got the throat capacity to do it because they're plankton eating, aren't they?
Right, of course. Yeah, well.
It doesn't really matter when it happens to you out at sea and you've no idea what the fuck's going on, though.
No, because as I fall into the whale's mouth, the last thing I'm going to be thinking is, oh, not to worry. They only eat plankton. I'm not going to have time to think that because I will be shitting myself blind.
Oh, it's okay. It's a membrane, not teeth.
Yeah. Oh, well, this is what a relief. Wow. Okay. Well, man, my story for the week, it pales in comparison to man being eaten by a whale. I'll tell you that for nothing. I broke out the Randonautica app again after a few years off because, of course, for our folks who don't know, Randonautica was an app kind of became popular during the pandemic. It claims to use some kind of
magic.
Essentially, to provide random points on maps, which it claims are, you can sort of send it to power places or anomalous places. Again, who's to say how much of it is accurate, but what it will do is send you to random places on maps. And really had some interesting experiences back in Victoria when I did this during the pandemic. And of course, there's the famous case of those kids finding a body parts in a suitcase underneath a pier, and I want to say Seattle.
Yes, I think it was, wasn't it?
Yeah.
God.
And recently, I've been going to acupuncture, as I've told Paul, and it's interesting. I feel calmer. I feel I'm not going to get into the why I've been going. The calm was not the reason I went, but it's been kind of a happy byproduct. And I've been more like curious about having experiences and strange experiences. So I fired up Randonautica and I went out looking the other night. And my intention was inspiration. I was looking for inspiration for Fear Daily. And first, it tried to send me into 2 separate suburban backyards, which, of course, I was not doing.
Boo.
I know, right? Lame. But what I thought was really interesting is both suburban houses it sent me to, in order to get there, I basically followed 2 different cars that were going to the same addresses. So I realized after a couple turns, geez, I'm right behind these guys. And it seems real weird that I'm taking every turn off they're taking. And both times, yeah, they were going to my specified point, although they were going inside. So yeah, who knows what that entails. It sent me to a darkened corner of a snowy park at the edge of a suburban area. Again, I got close to that one. I drove up into the parking area of the park, but I just looked at this collection of shadows at the far, far end behind the playground. And I thought, no, this is how horror movies start. And then the very last one for that night, it sent me to this empty school parking lot. And I pulled in, I thought, well, there's nothing here. There's nothing of interest here. But then I just waited and I could hear distantly voices. There was no one around. And the atmosphere in the place was so bad. It just is this very heavy, oppressive atmosphere. And again, I don't know exactly what it was. I just know that I heard voices. There was no one around and I could see a fair distance. And again, just this very intense feeling of, I shouldn't be here. So I fucked off and went home, and it was just kind of fun to like get out and kind of have those adventures again. 'Cause I haven't done that shit in a long time. Once I had to sell the car back in Victoria, I kind of just got out of the habit of doing this kind of thing, right? So it's taken me a while of having the car and living in a place where you can go places to just kind of to reawaken that side of me. But then it was almost my ass, because the next day I drove to the town of Stratford, had coffee, was doing some writing. And then on my way home, I thought, oh shit, I should fire up Randonautica, have a poke around. Tried a couple different things. And then the last one I tried was my intention. I don't know why I picked this, was confusion. And it sent me onto this country road to what looked like the middle of a field. But before I got there, I was about half a kilometer out from the point when I had two large trucks coming toward me on this narrow country road, and I had to kind of drive on the side of basically like pull right onto my lane. And there must have been ice ruts, because all of a sudden my car started pulling off the road into the trees. And I had to, I was so lucky that I was able to steer out of it, because for a second there, I couldn't. It was just like, nope, the car is now headed towards the forest. You and the forest are about to become one. And it wasn't until I just managed to correct at the last second and pull out of it, and it was fine. But I guess that was the confusion that I had been promised, was a confusion of, am I going to become a permanent part of the landscape?
I don't think we've got long until serial killers start using apps like that, haven't we?
Geez, that hadn't occurred to me.
Yeah, they try all kinds of stuff. It wouldn't surprise. I mean, we've had incidents here with Grindr and stuff where they've had serial killers and things like that. People using certain bars to lure unsuspecting victims home and things. So I wouldn't be surprised if it's happening right now and we just don't know about it.
Well, serial killers, if you're listening, stay the fuck off of Randonautica, because I want to keep using it. And if it gets banned, I'm going to be pissed.
Well, if finding a dead body in a suitcase doesn't get it shut down, nothing's really, is it?
Well, let's hope. One last thing before we head to the patrons. This is something Paul and I both want to say. Obviously, there's a lot of shit going on. Most of our audience is American. There's a lot of shit going on right now with your government, with your news. We're not going to be addressing it directly on this show. That's just not what we do here. We really want to try and keep politics out of our show. However, it is important to both of us that you know that we have no time on this show for bullies, and we have nothing but love for the LGBTQ community and for our trans brothers, sisters, and NBs. And if you don't have that, if that is a problem for you, that is a problem in your heart. And that's something you got to fix, because this is just the world. The world has moved on. The world has changed. You got to catch up. And if you can't, again, if you're hearing this and you're thinking, fuck those guys, they're political, you are the problem. And we love you, but you have to grow and you have to move past that shit, because there's a lot of people lying to you. A lot of people trying to get you mad at the wrong people. These folks are just trying to live their lives. Leave them alone.
Everybody knows it's the Dallas Cowboys' fault.
There we go. Paul knows. It's all about the coaching. And right now, you guys got some shitty coaching down there in the States. I'll tell you that for nothing.
Just like the Dallas Cowboys.
Exactly. So, yeah, we just, again, we're not going to harp on this. We're not going to keep coming back to it. But it's important for us that we put that stake in the ground so you guys know where we stand. There's no fucking around. All right. Now, it's time to thank our patrons.
Woo!
This one's for the patrons.
Patrons, we could not do what we do without you. So thank you. Thank you, thank you. For real, guys. Every single person who listens to the Ghost Story Guys, you help make us who we are. But patrons, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube subscribers, you guys are the real MVPs. And without you, this great big machine does not work. And while we'd like to thank all of our subscribers, we would especially like to thank our latest ones. They are
Yvonne.
Sezzy B.
Nambo Lynn.
Again, thank you so much for your generous support of this show. We couldn't do it without you. And if you'd like to join our awesome community of subscribers, get access to bonus shows, extra conversations between me and Paul, early access, ad-free shows, all that good stuff, head to patreon.com/ghoststoryguys. That's patreon.com/ghoststoryguys. You also get access to our monthly live stream, and depending on which tier you subscribe at, your name read out in our Ghost Force shoutouts. You can also become a friend of the cabin via Apple Podcasts. All right, we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back with some stories. Our first story comes from our listener, Jamie. It was Christmas 1987. After the family holiday festivities were complete, I went to a party with some friends. On the way, I said to my friends, "Ladies, I'm going to fall head over heels in love tonight. My life is going to change forever." As we approached the house, I saw a tall man smoking a cigarette. The porch light created a halo effect in his blonde hair. I walked up to him and introduced myself. We were inseparable for the rest of the evening. Our relationship was a short-lived whirlwind. I needed to move to finish high school, and he needed to go into rehab. We had an agreement to try again when we were both healthier. Fast forward to Memorial Day weekend 1988. I had the following dream. I was sitting outside Jay's house waiting for him. Eventually, he came outside but walked right past me. He got into his truck, and I walked to the passenger side. The door was locked. I knocked on the window, but he didn't look at me. I climbed onto the front seat of the truck on the driver's side, and I was beating on the window. It still appeared that he didn't see or hear me. Eventually, he lifted his hand, waved, and finally looked at me with tears in his eyes. I woke up sobbing. I wrote to him that day, but never heard back. Advanced to July 1988. I got kicked out of my house for my 18th birthday. I wrote him again explaining the situation, providing my address, and letting him know I was working on moving back. A few days later, I received a phone call from his sister. She told me she had some bad news. Though my brain ran through 10 possible scenarios, I said to her, "He died May 28th at 2:33 a.m. When she asked how I knew, I told her that he said goodbye. 36 years later, it still hurts like hell. About 10 years after Jay passed, I was in one of the worst depressive episodes of my life. I had gone to the cemetery on his birthday to leave flowers. I stood there for quite a while, contemplating. This petite older woman with dark hair, warm brown eyes, and a sweet smile came to my side. She said, "I came to see Mommy and Poppy. Who are you here for?" I explained that he was my first love and that he died much too young. She enveloped me into a hug and whispered, "He's not ready for you yet. You need to take care of yourself. He'll let you know when it's time." She let me go and walked away. When I turned to say thank you, she was gone. And Jamie, that is beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. It's interesting, Paul, when I assembled, these are all, this is a listener stories episode. I forgot to mention that in the intro. And when I assembled the stories, I was not intending to sort of cluster it around this idea of grief, but I would say 75% of the stories on this episode are kind of like this. And they all, some of them, some of these are a little bit older, some just kind of have come in recently, but it's sort of interesting when these themes kind of just come together on their own.
Yes. It's almost as if the universe is pulling your strings without you knowing it.
Yeah, I think so. It's sort of, again, the show's in kind of an interesting place this month. And so I think it's fascinating that this has kind of happened when it has. I agree. I do think there is a larger plan at work there. And Jamie, actually, your story reminded me of someone. I hadn't thought about this person in 15 years. But when I got back from traveling in 2009, of course, Nick and I had gotten married, and the financial crisis was in full swing. So I had to find work, and because Nick couldn't work until her permanent residency came through, and she had some savings, but not enough that she could live high. And so I had to find basically whatever work I could. We scraped by for a lot of that year. I was doing temp gigs. I worked as a mover. I worked as a baggage clerk for a ferry company, a lot of different stuff. And I was really struggling, financially we were struggling. It was difficult for me to kind of readjust to having spent a year traveling to suddenly being like on an island, just scrambling to find work. And so I started having dizzy spells, and I really thought something was very wrong with me. And so I ended up, did all the things, went to a doctor, all the scans, all that shit. And it was but it was anxiety is kind of what it came back as. Like physically I was fine, but I was struggling with anxiety because I felt trapped. And so I went to, I couldn't, because of the financial situation, I couldn't afford to go to therapy, like private therapy. That just wasn't an option. But there was a free group therapy that I could do. And so I did that, and it wasn't really for me. I could maybe do that more now, but I was a very, very closed off person back then, very private. Growing up in a small town where everyone knows your shit, you kind of learn to keep it to yourself, right?
Well, you don't need to tell anybody because his mothers do.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I think I've told you before, we used to have a neighbor across the street, this little old lady named Amelia. And she was like, it was like the movie Stakeout over there constantly. If I so much as farted too loud, she'd be on the phone to my grandmother, and my grandmother be giving me shit for it. So, I'm sure that had no ill impact on my growing up whatsoever. But anyway, so I went to group, and it wasn't for me. But I met this woman there, and we just walked for a little bit afterwards. She said her name was Carol, and she just unloaded everything on me. She was in love with some rocker, and he had a name like Tommy Rockstar, something stupid like that. Like it was
Billy Idol.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Some dude. But she was at the end of her rope. She loved this guy. He treated her very badly. And I remember her saying that she said, this is it for me. Last chance Carol is what she called herself. This is last chance Carol. And again, I never went back to groups, so I never found out how things went for her. But I hadn't thought about her in years. And I kind of wonder if that had worked out for her, or if, as with so many other people, the pursuit of toxic love just kind of took her over the waterfall.
It's a tale old as time, sadly, isn't it?
It really is. Yeah, it really is, man. So, Jamie, thank you for bringing back that memory again. I hope that wherever she is, I hope that Carol found her way to the light, and I hope that Jay has as well. And again, I hope it's many a year before you join him on the other side. We certainly prefer having you over here. Hey, folks, just a note that for this section, my recording was not working properly. So for the first part of the conversation between Paul and I, you're going to be hearing my backup recording. So it's going to sound not great. But we managed to thankfully fix the problem before the rest of the episode was recorded.
Our next story is from Mira. Thank you for your fabulous podcast. I am a great fan and look forward to it every week. Brennan, you are a very talented man. And Paul, your fountain of knowledge amazes me. I enjoy your banter together, and especially when Paul regales us with stories of his misspent youth. It wasn't misspent, Mira. I, too, am a fan of Sweep. I would very much like your comments and take of an experience that happened to me earlier this year. I'd like to start with the fact that I've experienced sleep paralysis and high strainedness in the dream state throughout my life. I'd like to preface this story with a brief outline of what I've been through the past few years so you'll get an idea of my state of mind. Back in 2019 was the start or catalyst to a series of events that may be referred to, after going down many a rabbit holes in search of answers, as a spiritual awakening. This was and still is a very difficult time in my life, where I've dealt with mental health issues in my family, marriage breakup, losing 2 jobs in 1 year, fighting to keep a roof over me and my children's heads, financial worries, meeting and then losing my soul connection. In fact, every aspect of my life, including friends and family, has been decimated. During this time, I've experienced times of synchronicity and high strangeness too, and I believe this all started after being hit between the eyes by a very fast-moving bright white light during a meditative state back in 2019. Now to my story, where I must point out I am not on medication and nor do I take substances. It was a few months ago, about 9:30 on a Saturday morning. I'd been listening to Paul McKenna's Change Your Life in 7 Days hypnotic recording to help me with my state of mind. After the recording finished, I was nice and relaxed and I just wanted to lay there for a moment before getting up. I was lying on my back, staring up at the ceiling on the left-hand side of my queen-size bed. My eyes followed to the left, a tiny light which I took to be an insect. Now this is the moment where I now believe I must have entered an altered state of mind. My eyes moved to the right towards the window and a chair in the corner. On the chair there was hanging a monkey marionette which was swaying in the breeze from the open window. Suddenly the breeze picked up and the blinds started to flap, and then came a roaring wind-like sound. I closed my eyes and I had the impression I was now lying on the right-hand side of the bed. Almost instantly, I was startled by a male voice in my head. The voice was not in my mind, it was separate. It was as if I was hearing it with my ears, but it was inside my head. The voice spoke very deliberately and with authority the same phrase over and over again. Mira, put your hands at 10 to 2. Mira, put your hands at 10 to 2. Mira, put your hands at 10 to 2. I just froze and kept my eyes shut. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I kept on saying it to myself. What the fuck? And the voice kept on saying, Mira, put your hands at 10 to 2. I just laid there stunned and told myself not to panic, but also not to move my hands as I didn't trust what I was hearing. In fact, I said in my mind, no way am I moving my hands. The voice carried on as I was trying to calm myself and not panic. Suddenly, I felt myself sinking inside myself, a feeling of descending into the bed. It was at this moment when things became more of a lucid dream. I suddenly found myself standing on a wide landing of a circular stairwell in what seemed like a military-like base of sorts. The walls were painted cream, and all the edges seemed rounded. There were no windows. I stood there stunned and bewildered, and shouted out, "Where am I? Who am I? What am I?" I then had the impression that I had returned to some sort of mission or tour of duty. I proceeded to unzip and remove what I thought of my human suit. Underneath I was still the same, but a more improved version, more good-looking, slimmer, fitter, younger. At least I wasn't a lizard. Brilliant. At least I wasn't a lizard, thank goodness. I was wearing only what I can describe as a black and red uniform, similar to the uniforms worn on Star Trek. I also became aware of another man standing further down to my right in the same uniform. I took stock of my surroundings. Further down from me, the landing met a corridor going to the right, and to my left, the landing curved around to an archway, and I couldn't see beyond the archway as it was dark. I decided to explore even though I didn't know where the heck I was. I went to the left towards the archway. Out of the corner of my eye I saw a man sitting on a chair as I passed. I could only see his legs. He was wearing jeans and tan work boots. Now I think he was my soul connection, though this could just be wishful thinking on my part. As I neared the archway, my vision started to tunnel and fade. All of a sudden, my eyes flew open, and I was back, lying on the left-hand side of the bed. I just laid there stunned, trying to process what had just happened. I was trying to work out what the meaning of the words the man was saying. The only thing I could think of was when I was learning to drive, and you have to put your hands at 10 to 2 on the steering wheel. As this was the only thing I could think of, I made the decision to be more alert and mindful and make sure that I put both hands on the wheel while driving after this. Normally I'm quite blasé and drive with one hand. Fast forward 2 weeks. I was driving home from work on the main dual carriageway in the left-hand lane. We drive on the left. I was approaching a side road intersection with cars waiting to turn right from the opposite side. This intersection can be fairly dangerous due to traffic lights further down which back up the traffic, blocking access to the side road that's on the right-hand lane. The traffic was built up in the right-hand lane, but clear in the left, and I could see the cars wanting to turn right, and because I was being more alert, I slowed down approaching the intersection. I was 2 car lengths from this intersection when a car, whose vision would have been blocked by the built-up traffic, suddenly shot across my path. I stood on those brakes so hard that my tyres bunny-hopped on the tarmac. Thankfully I did stop in time and was extremely shaken. Who was it that spoke to me? God? A guardian angel? A spirit guide? My commander? Did he warn me? I don't know. All I know that everything I've relayed to you happened. I constantly think about this and have no answers. As for the military light base, I've no idea about that either. By the way, there isn't a chair in the corner of the bedroom, and nor do I own a monkey marionette. I would love to know your thoughts. Keep your light shining bright. Mira.
So, Mira, thank you for sharing that. It's really fascinating stuff. I was actually thinking the red and black shirt, in addition to kind of reminding me, reminding me of Star Trek, I was actually thinking it reminds me of the descriptions of the Plaid people. You know, it seems like an interesting motif to have reoccur, especially in a dream that seems like you're reaching out to something beyond yourself.
Yeah, I'd be interested to know what colours the cars were.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's a great question, too.
What colour Mira's car is and what colour the car was that cut her up.
Yeah. Oh, fascinating. Well, I was thinking about this, and I think I've used this example a dozen times, but I recently wrote a story for Fear about the Damascus disaster, the Titan II missile that blew up and just barely managed to avoid going nuclear. And there was a story in there that's kind of the same thing. There was a guy who was he didn't realize, but it was after the explosion. He got up after the initial shockwave, and he was just standing there kind of stunned. And someone yelled in his ear, "Run." And he did. And he narrowly avoided a column of concrete and rebar falling down from the sky and crushing him. And there was no one around him who could have said that. So actually, as I recall, one of my sort of friends of my family in Revelstoke, she had a similar experience to you, Mira, where someone told her to take a slightly different road or drive home than she ordinarily would have, and she was in an accident, but it was because someone had missed or gone through a stop sign. But when she got hit, she said, well, what good is this advice if I still got hit? But I pointed out that if she had taken her usual route and gone down that road instead of the one she did, the guy would have hit her at a much faster speed. And instead of, fucking her up her arm, which I think is what happened, it could have killed her.
Mm.
So it does seem like someone was looking out for you, Mira.
Yeah. I think sometimes when something like this happens, you can try and find more meaning in it than there actually is, if that makes sense.
How so?
Because I think you begin to think, who is this? Why have they told me this? And you begin to think, is it a certain person? Is it somebody from another side? Is it, as Mira says, is it a god, a spirit, a guardian angel? I mean, sometimes when people have experiences like this, we can often wonder why. But I think we should just be thankful instead, because for whatever reason, it probably saved her life.
Yeah, that's it. And you're right. Like I think it's easy to start reading into, especially the military symbolism and the sort of the shedding of the skin. I mean, and to start kind of taking it literally, I guess.
Yeah.
There's it's like a conversation I've had with listeners, and I can't remember if I've actually said their name on air, so I won't say it now, but we have both dreamed about this sort of shopping mall that's this kind of liminal space. And basically the way we've described it to each other, it seems like we're both talking about the same place, but I don't necessarily know that it exists in actuality, even as a dream place. I wonder if it's just, again, a sort of way to interpret an experience we're having. Because this is the thing, right? Everything you experience, even as a spirit, if it's coming back to if you're remembering it in your brain, it has to come through your brain. There's no, and this is why sometimes I get salty when psychic or skeptics will say, well, there was brain activity on your, that we were registering brain activity while you were having this trip. So obviously this was just a hallucination. But I think no, because even if you're going somewhere, you're still connected to your body. And if you're remembering it, it has to be processing through your brain. Your brain is where your consciousness kind of is situated. So no matter what it is you're experiencing, you kind of have to think about it first, right? In order to remember it physically. So I think we're kind of stuck with the imagery we have in our head, and we're kind of using that as a way to filter the information we're getting. So, I mean, it's possible it's a guardian angel of some kind, Mira. It seems like someone was looking out for you, but I think it might actually be too hard to tease apart what it was. Because I think the problem that when you start doing that, and Paul, I'm very curious to know your thoughts on this. I feel like one of the things that you can start doing then is you can start expecting it in other parts of your life, and being disappointed when it doesn't happen.
Yes, absolutely. Or if something goes terribly wrong, and obviously as Mira refers to, she's had a very challenging few years. And sometimes the temptation would be, where the hell were you 5 years ago when I really needed you? And so you can overanalyze it. And sometimes, and I'm certainly not saying this in regards to Mira, but I think sometimes people can become quite angry about these things because, as you say, they don't occur when something else goes wrong. And therefore you think, well, why did they bother doing it then? I don't think it would have been that bad. And you just don't know sometimes, sometimes little things can have big consequences, both physically and mentally. Sometimes you may not even realize what a low ebb you are. And the tiniest thing can set you back weeks, months, send you into a downward spiral. So you never know, Mira.
Yeah, I can own that. Again, this is sort of something I don't like talking about, but when I was at my most depressed, when I was back in Victoria before I moved to Montreal, I would have that experience. I would hear stories on the show about, oh, my guardian angel did X for me, or Nick sometimes would have these experiences where she could smell. There's a smell she associates with her family, and sometimes it would just, when she was having a bad time, it would just appear. And I was going through a lot of very bleak depression, I was going through a lot of very black depression at that point. And I would torture myself with that thought. I would walk around my apartment at night, torturing myself with the thought that, well, no one's coming for me. No one's helping me right now. There's no spirit coming to help me or point me in the right direction. So I must be alone and unloved, and there's no one who gives a shit about me. And so I think if you're looking for, if you demand proof of those things, I think, again, in good times and bad, I think you can set yourself up to be in the situation I was, which, again, no, not you, Mira, but definitely me, where I was like, well, again, I must be completely fucked and forsaken because it's not happening right here in front of me.
Yes. I think that is something anybody who suffered from suicidal thoughts or black moods or dark periods of depression, that you do get those things in your head, because it's what your brain wants you to think. That's how it works. It wants you to think that nobody cares, that nobody's coming to help, that there is no guardian angel out there. And often we're in such a stupor that often we miss things, or we don't recognize the help when it's there right in front of us sometimes, because our brains are so scrambled by depression that we can't seem right from wrong sometimes. So I think it's just one of the black dog's weapons to fuck with us, really, that when we're in that kind of downward spiral, too often we're looking for impact instead of looking up for the rope.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. So, Mira, again, thank you for sharing that with us. It's a incredible story, and we're deeply grateful that you're listening. We're happy to have you as part of our community.
Yes, and I'd just like to reaffirm my youth wasn't misspent. Mostly.
Would never. I would never think that.
No, it was.
Nah, it led to you becoming the stellar person you are. So it was not misspent.
It led me to Sheffield, so I suppose there was a reason for it. There, I see. I was guided. Some people would say it was like a 5-year blitz of of hedonistic one-upmanship, but without all of that, I wouldn't have ended up in Sheffield. So it's strange where your life leads you, even though it might not make much sense at the time.
Yeah, that's it, man. Oh God, yeah, I understand that on a spiritual level. Let me tell you.
Not for us to question.
This next story comes from Sandy. I signed up last month for a subscription to your show. I'm just notifying you now. I can't remember what I should send you to verify it. As for a few creepy stories, here's a couple. We live in Winnipeg. Yeah, Winterpeg, man, it's cold out. And have always had a little weirdness running through the family. The farm in East Selkirk. My mom, dad, and 3 sisters had spent a late summer's day at my Aunt Bodie's farm. Dad did farm work for his aunt while we entertained ourselves. We were likely aged 6 to 12 years old. I am the 3rd child. This would make it the very early 1970s. The farm was a strip of land that ran from Highway 204 to the muddy Red River. It was a thin strip of 11 acres, as were all the river properties around there, as the land was divided like this when settlers came and pushed out the locals. The property consisted of a farmhouse and barn, the yard, then a road left the yard and ran along the first field, which was vegetables, took a left turn and dropped into a gully, mostly geese, skunks, and deer, then ran alongside a second field, potatoes and pumpkins. The road sort of fell off after that as it was close to the river. The riverbank flooded regularly, so it was left wild and was full of oak, aspen, 5-foot-tall burdock, and wild grasses. It was the first time we had been allowed to go down to the river by ourselves, so it was a huge deal for us. The sun was still up, though low on the horizon. As we crested the gully into the second field, we all stopped. About 40 meters ahead was a floating, misty shape on the track along the second field by the stand of trees. We did not recognize it as natural phenomenon or an animal. My sisters saw it as very different things. A very large, dark brownish shape like a cow, a triangle shape, and a huge, solid black circle. I saw it as a floating dark shadow. Strange how we all remember something different. We didn't see any legs, and it appeared to float a few feet above the ground. It started to move very fast towards us. We were all absolutely terrified. I was frozen to the spot while my sisters ran back to the yard. After a moment, I also turned and ran, managing to not only catch up, but pass my sisters. This was the only time I ever beat them in a foot race. We all piled screaming into Dad's car. The adults checked shortly afterwards, but nothing was found. They implied it was a neighbor's cow, but we knew what all the local animals looked like. We did go back down to the gully and the river many times over the decades, but never saw anything like it again. This next one is my youngest sister's story. We lived in a very old house in the middle of Winnipeg, and we have several stories about it. I had an imaginary friend named Sam when I was very young. It was a natural phase, Mom thought, having only sisters for siblings. He faded from my imagination probably by the time I was 7. Fast forward a lot of years. My daughter Sarah is about 3 and only starting to speak. She had a strange fascination with the cold air register on the wall along the stairs leading down to the basement bathroom. One day we were making our way back upstairs. She stops, presses her face against the register, and says, "Hi." That was my cue to pick her up and scoot upstairs. Making casual conversation after we got home that night, I asked her who she said hi to. She told me his name was Sam, and he's a boy but bigger than her brother. Brown hair, and a couple of years older. I phoned Mom the next day and told her I didn't think my imaginary friend Sam was so imaginary after all. Sarah says now she was actually terrified of the register. So, Sandy, thank you very much for sending that in. I'm really curious to know, Paul, why she was afraid of the register, and if she really was afraid at the time, or if that is something she's kind of retroactively put onto it because it is so unusual.
I think sometimes you can ascribe fear to something that doesn't seem sort of connected, but then again, you'll often hear stories of children that have weird sort of reactions to things that adults find quite normal. And I'm not, you know, is it that they think that there's something in there? Or, as we've touched on before, the amount of children that have very disturbing imaginary friends who live in air vents and basements and closets and things, is it just another orifice for these things to lurk about in?
Don't know if I love that particular word being used. I just finished reading that Clive Barker book, and I'm pretty much done hearing about orifices of any kind for a little while.
Yeah, Clive Barker books do that to you.
Oh, man, that was rough. I was listening to the audiobook, and that narrator deserves a Purple Heart.
He's a great advertisement for safe sex, is Clive Barker.
Oof. I am no prude, as you know, and several times I looked at my speaker and went, what the fuck is happening right now? I actually started skipping ahead. I'm like, yeah, we get it. The ghosts are having a big old orgy. Yeah, I don't want to know any more about this. I don't mind telling you, Clive. Oh, of course, that's what's happening next. Yep, of course it is. All right, yep, skip. Okay, now we're back to the ghost, the part of the story where the ghosts are not inside each other. That's great.
Yes. James Herbert was very descriptive in those kinds of situations in his books.
I don't think I know James Herbert.
He was our greatest, well, probably apart from Clive Barker, our greatest horror author. Taken much too young. He wrote The Rats, Lair, Domain, The Haunted Cottage, Moon, The Haunting of Critchley Hall. What else did he write? Spear, Fluke. Is it a story about a man that thinks he's a dog, or is it a dog that thinks it's a man? Survivor. He was incredibly prolific through the 70s and 80s, and then he got writer's block. Couldn't write a book for 9 years. Managed to get one done, released it, and he dropped dead 6 months later.
Oh shit!
About 10 years ago now. Criminally, I think he's the biggest selling British horror author ever. Still,
wow.
But he burst on the scene. Rats was his first book, which is essentially about giant mutated rats bursting out of the ground in London and doing what rats do. And it's not a book a 9-year-old boy should read on holiday.
But he did, didn't he, Paul?
He did, and he didn't sleep very well for a week.
That'll do it. I wasn't real hungry after I started reading that Clive Barker book. I'll tell you that for nothing.
Yeah, it was like that when I read Nightbreed. I was like, I'm very open-minded for an 18-year-old, but poof.
Yeah, folks, plug your kids' ears for a sec. But that guy, I was saying to myself, because I'm reading his books of blood as well, the short stories, just for inspiration. And I'm like, this guy has a thing for BDSM, piss, and bees.
Like Candyman.
Yeah, well, that's it. Like, because obviously that's the I can't remember the name of the story that Candyman's based on, but it works there because like, oh, this is a totally new concept. But clearly he just thought, oh, bees, that's great, horny people and bees. Let's keep this wagon train a rolling. And again, there is some of that in Cold Heart Canyon, and it's not a bad book or anything, but there's some stuff you got to get through.
Yeah, I'm trying to think now. You've got me thinking. Is it something like The Unforgiven or The Forbidden or something?
Yes, it's something like that. Again, I was just reading the story. I can pull it up in my Kindle app here.
I'm sure I read somewhere once that there was also a woman in Chicago who claimed that there was a ghost trying to kill her through a medicine cabinet in her bathroom.
Oh, interesting.
In the late 80s. But I'm not really sure if crack had anything to do with that. But that would put it in the right era, because what's Candyman, 91?
I think 94, the film.
Oh, it's earlier than that.
Is it?
Yeah.
Let's find out. The Forbidden is the Candyman one.
I knew it was something going with F.
I'm going to say 92.
I'm sticking with 91.
92. Yeah. I'm going to take off the clothes.
Again.
Again, what can I say? Actually, continuing the ADHD theme of this episode so far, Candyman obviously starring the amazing Tony Todd, who sadly has left us.
Yes.
And I just started playing Indiana Jones and the Great Circle.
All right.
And who is in that game but Tony Todd? What an awesome surprise that was.
Oh, was it his like penultimate role before he passed?
It might have been. I'm not totally sure, but it's very possible. Yeah, it's a great game. Totally. We won't do video game talk, but yeah, very good game.
Okay.
So thank you again, Sandy. And again, we would, if you have any more stories, we would love to hear them. Actually, one last thing I just remembered. When I was looking around for Winnipeg stuff, I found this, it was a Reddit thread about, haunting in Winnipeg. And there's not much here, but one person said that they got a tour of the kitchens and banquet hall of the Fort Garry Hotel about 10 years ago.
Ah.
One of the guys in the group asked the chef who was guiding the tour it started with someone saying that a friend had spent a night in the haunted room at Fort Garry, which is room 202 apparently. He swears he saw orbs that would interact with him. And so someone then commented, they said, we got the tour of the banquet, and the chef said that, he asked the chef about this, and as soon as they asked that question, the lights flickered, which thought was interesting. But the reason I mention it is someone then commented, well, I stayed there and nothing happened.
Oh, right. Great.
Oh, yeah. We could just disregard it then, because your experience is the totality of human experience.
Case closed.
Yep, that's it. Stamp.
It's like that story about the South Carolina strange lights, and all the headlines are, scientists solve South Carolina ghost lights mystery. And when you read the article, they haven't solved it at all. They've just said, we wonder if it's to do with earthquakes and their earth lights. And so they put a suggestion forward, and at no point does any of the scientists involved in this say they've solved it. They just think it might be this.
Well, as you know, I mentioned and I mentioned in the last episode, I'm recording the audiobook for Ruth's new book, and I keep coming across this. Again, she's such a lovely woman, and there's these people who just respond to her requests for information to say things like, well, nothing's ever happened to me. I've lived my whole life. Nothing's ever happened to me. I think it's a bunch of bullshit. Who fucking cares, man? I'm looking for ghost stories. Well, I don't have any. Well, boy, this is an unnecessary conversation.
Yep. I mean, how many people have walked through a field of cows and not been attacked? Millions. But they tried to kill me, and therefore they're bastards.
Which thus starting the great Paul v. Cows feud.
Hey, I've seen a cow take a punch. Whew, I ain't hitting one of them, mate.
Cow tipping. Never. I remember when we were kids, cow tipping was something people talked about. And of course, it was never really a thing, from what I understand. And it's because those cows would kill the shit out of you.
Yeah, I saw a very comical update of that on a video recently that someone shared, where it's like three guys going, "Oh, we're going cow tipping," and then they turn up and throw money at cows.
All right, we're gonna play some ads now. Let's not encourage this behavior.
Our next story is from Larry. Greetings, guys. I've written several stories and sent you one before from my childhood. I heard you read at least one of them, so many thanks. I love listening to your show, the stories and commentaries, so many thanks, and I will make sure to log on and become a patron. Here's a story of something that happened recently, and I hope you find it worthy of the podcast. All my best, Larry. The Jacksonville sighting of December 2022. This is a story about something my sister and I saw and experienced in December 2022 back in Florida. Pardon the very long background intro, but I think it's important to set the stage for why this experience had such an impact on us both. I'm only now just getting around to writing it down to allow time for the trauma of the period to lessen. No, I'm not alluding to the trauma of being in Florida, but rather the death of a family member. Let me explain. My sister Teresa remarried about 7 years ago to a handsome, pleasant and easygoing guy who went by the initials CJ. My sister and I grew up close and remained so, but we lived on opposite sides of the United States and or in different countries for a long time as adults. We've always kept up by phone, WhatsApp and the occasional visit, but because of this, I didn't know her new husband well. We'd only met 3 or 4 times in person, though I did speak to him by phone frequently. I liked CJ and thought he was good for Teresa. CJ and Teresa were the same age at 60 at the time, and overall I think CJ did not feel worthy of my sister. He said as much to me several times. He really did live for her. Whilst my sister and CJ were the same age, they were years apart in terms of their personal health and lifestyle. My sister is super healthy and works out, and you'd probably think she was in her early 50s rather than her early 60s. However, CJ has had his share of health problems and emergency room visits over the years. The main culprit was his heart, but he also had other health issues, and it was safe to say he was aging more quickly than Teresa. About 2 years ago, CJ took early medical retirement from his employer of 30 years, and my sister received a job offer in Florida soon after, so they loaded up the truck and they moved down to Jacksonville from the West Coast to begin anew. After about 4 months in Jacksonville, CJ went for a seemingly standard outpatient medical procedure, but there were complications. Also, there were other general life complications in Jacksonville. It was not the Florida experience they'd anticipated. The home they'd purchased needed too many repairs. It was an aging condo in Florida, so there were many unpredictable assessment expenses, along with the rising costs of homeowner insurance and inflation in general. Fortunately, Teresa works in a relatively high-demand career space and received a job offer to move overseas for a well-placed assignment in Europe. Perhaps chasing another dream lifestyle, they were both set on leaving Florida behind. Flash forward about 5 months, and Teresa had gone overseas to start her new job and find a home. Meanwhile, CJ stayed behind to sell the condo, his car, and to have what was supposed to be a low-risk corrective surgery, correcting the complications from the previous visit. Teresa always worried and asked me to keep tabs on CJ, and having an odd feeling myself, I phoned CJ the night before his procedure to wish him well and see how he was faring. In good spirits, we ended the call with the usual, "I'll talk to you later." 24 hours later, CJ was gone. Dead. I won't go into the awful details, but there were once again complications that resulted in cascading organ failure from the corrective surgery that he sadly did not survive. Teresa was devastated. She flew back immediately from Europe, and I met her at the airport where her flight was connecting and flew back with her to Jacksonville. I stayed with her the entire month of December, helping her organise CJ's affairs, figure out finances, sell his car, sell the condo, not to mention the funeral and burial arrangements, and she opted for a cremation. This is where it gets strange. Teresa and CJ's condo is one of those 2-story models, large with balconies overlooking the St. Johns River. With solid concrete walls, the place is as quiet as a tomb. The apartment was sparsely furnished, since much of their belongings were in transit by boat to Europe. We spent a lot of time going through CJ's personal things and looking for items like receipts, bills and financial records. About the 3rd day after CJ's passing, he'd not been cremated yet, and Teresa and I were in his office, man cave, looking for an iPhone power cable. CJ's man cave was up on the 2nd floor with its own adjacent bathroom, and this was the bathroom I was using. The man cave had one of those phony fireplaces with electric fires you can turn on for those chilly North Florida nights, which is definitely a Florida thing. The fireplace was framed on either side by built-in cabinets with doors, and I was hunched down to look in the lower left cabinet, though unaware at the time, Teresa was looking over my shoulder. When I opened the doors, a softball-sized orb of fuzzy light shot right out in front of me, paused, and then took a mechanical abrupt right angle to my right, and then another abrupt right angle turn, and shot straight into the fake fireplace, vanishing. It moved like one of those laser beam lights when you play with a cat, but again, this was the size of a softball, and it happened in about 5 seconds. I was very freaked out and wasn't sure about what I'd seen. I'm a believer, but a skeptic, and I was shaken. I was going to brush it off as a weird dust bunny with OCD and cover it up the way guys often do. But then I saw my sister's face, and she stuttered, "Did you see that?" I said yes, I had. Teresa was just as freaked out as I was. From that point forward, the upstairs room seemed to have a presence. I felt watched when I went up there to change clothes or use the shower. Presence wasn't bad in any way, but it just felt overwhelmingly sad. My sister and I are pragmatic, rational, logical sorts. We are very German culturally. So when we both immediately concluded it was CJ, we didn't even need to deliberate or discuss it. Neither of us had any doubt. The memory of the sighting hasn't faded either, and we talk about it all now and again, still with a sense of awe, amazement, and sadness.
Well, Larry, thank you for sharing that, man. That's, I got to say, Paul, I live in fear of that, in fear of saying goodbye to someone and not realizing it's the last time. I mean, I know that ultimately that's just how life works, but the thought of it haunts me.
It's not a nice experience to go through.
No. I always hope maybe some instinct will tell me this is the last time so I can remember it, and it just never really works that way.
Well, that's the thing. Sometimes we attach more meaning to things when the reality of a passing occurs, and I think sometimes that's one of those things. Like we were talking about with Myra about trying to overanalyze and look for meanings where there might not be any. And I think this is a very similar situation that you always think, what if I told them not to go? What if and you know, personal experience, shit happens, and it's awful, and it feels like it's going to destroy your life, but you get through it eventually. But it's crushing trying to balance up the grief with regret, because they seem to intermingle in circumstances like that. And I would imagine that's exactly how Larry and Teresa were feeling, especially over such a sudden passing. Yeah,
no doubt. And again, to have it happen while you're trying to carve out the life you want, you know?
Yeah.
Like that's, and which is not to say, Larry, that they weren't appreciative of the life they had, because I'm sure they were, but it's such a great lesson to, you know, to, even though if you should always strive for things, right? You should always have something you're striving for, but at the same time to appreciate where you're at and what you're doing, because it can go away. It can go away or change irrevocably, you know? And which is, maybe sounds fatalistic, but it can. It doesn't mean it will, but it can. And again, as someone who has anxiety, I am very aware of these things because they perhaps occur to me more than they should.
Yeah, Julie often says things like that to me, and I just go, "It'll be what'll be, will be," you know. It is. Yeah, but what if you just drop dead now? I said, well, I'm not planning to, and I'm pretty good health. I'm a few pounds heavier than I'd like, but you know, the rest of the usual things that fall apart seem to be all working fine at the moment.
Well, that's a good thing.
It makes a pleasant change.
Yeah, that's fair.
All my limbs work. Woo!
Oh, now you're just bragging. Can't feel two fingers on this hand. My knee's fucked.
That was my 40s as well.
Okay, well, that's good.
You get used to the pain and then it just falls away, mate.
Oh, good. Okay, that's fine. So thank you again, Larry. Thank you so much for everything you've sent in. And if you've sent something we haven't read it yet, it just means we haven't got to it yet. But we will do our best to get it into the show. Again, folks, if you send something and we don't get it in, it's never a statement of quality. It's just a matter of having a finite number of spaces and only so many shows. This next story comes from our listener, Tord Henrik. Of course, you would have heard many of the stories he's sent to us on The Hidden Hauntings of Germany. That was episode 207. This story from Tord is called The Haunting of Schonach by Hans Ertl. And again, very likely Tord has translated this from German. So thank you, Tord. Again, otherwise these accounts would be completely off our radar. So this is very much appreciated. At the beginning of this year, a mysterious haunting occurred in a farmhouse in the municipality of Schonach, district of Triberg in Baden, reminiscent of the incidents in Dietersheim. In the bedroom of the R farm, which was used by several children, unexplained noises repeatedly occurred. Eventually, the children became so frightened that they fled to the adjacent parents' bedroom. The father tried to dispel the children's fear by explaining that it must only be mice. A thorough inspection showed that larger animals could not possibly enter the room. A mousetrap was set, and the children went to bed reassured. However, during the night, the noise resumed, louder than before. The mousetrap snapped shut and was hurled into a corner of the room. Believing now that a rat might be responsible, the father procured a larger trap, firmly anchored it to the floor, and set it again. The following night, the trap was triggered again, torn loose, and thrown across the room. This continued for several nights. The 12-year-old daughter, E, became particularly terrified as she claimed to see a dark, formless figure in the room. Later, potatoes began flying through the room in her presence, seemingly appearing out of nowhere, as they only became visible about a meter before impact. Ouch! Additionally, clothing was removed from wardrobes and either carefully arranged on the beds or thrown around chaotically. A heavy chest was moved from its place, and entire bed frames, along with their mattresses, were overturned. Despite all efforts, no perpetrator could be found. The mysterious events spread, attracting numerous curious onlookers. Some attempted to expose E as the culprit, while others hoped to experience the eerie occurrences firsthand. The flying potatoes appeared regularly, especially in the evenings. E was closely observed, yet she always clung to her father or other present individuals in fear. Puzzlingly, the potatoes only became visible immediately before impact, did not roll further after landing, and boiled potatoes did not burst upon hitting the ground. When E herself was struck by a potato, the skeptic's explanations began to falter. Doors and windows were locked, and walls and ceilings offered no obvious cause for the phenomenon. Another remarkable incident occurred when E was at a neighboring farm some distance away, yet the manifestations continued. This led some to speculate that she had accomplices. One Sunday morning, when only the farmhand, E, and her younger brother remained at the farmhand heard a noise at the first-floor window. At the same time, he heard the frightened screams of the children from the living room. Rushing inside, he found them cowering in fear at the table. It would have been impossible for E to have run upstairs, opened the window, and returned in such a short time. As the occurrences became increasingly threatening, the family sought the help of Mr. August Schneider, the son of a well-known Schonach tower clockmaker who had an interest in occult studies. Schneider initially attempted to find a natural explanation. One evening, when many curious visitors had gathered in the dimly lit farmhouse, the children were put to bed. Schneider and a companion positioned themselves at the door to the hallway leading past the children's room. Suddenly they heard shuffling footsteps on the staircase, then in the hallway, and finally in the parents' bedroom, although the door to this room was blocked by heavy wardrobes. The footsteps soon returned, approached the children's room, and at the crucial moment, Schneider opened the door. His companion shone a lantern into the hallway, but instead of a person, he saw only an amorphous, dark shape vanishing from sight, just as he had described. Schneider stayed on the farm for several days to continue his observations. In critical moments, E sought refuge with him. However, when Schneider had to return to Schonach briefly, he reassured the girl by giving her a photograph of himself, promising that nothing would happen to her as long as she kept it. Yet even this photo was later torn from her hands by an invisible force and hurled across the room. A similar phenomenon occurred when E received a blessed object, which she hid in her pocket. While sitting on her father's lap, she suddenly felt a strong pulling sensation on the pocket, despite her father's protective hand. Shortly after, the scapular was violently torn from her pocket and flung across the room. No natural explanation could be found. Eventually, pieces of paper with the words, "I am the ghost of S," were discovered inside some of the thrown potatoes. The district doctor, who had by now been informed of the case, took this as proof that E had staged the haunting herself. He tried to coerce her into a confession with severe threats, but this only resulted in a nervous breakdown. "Oh, great job, doctor. Jesus." The family then took E to Schonach to stay with Schneider's parents, where she recovered. From that moment on, no further unexplained phenomena occurred at the R farm. A final eerie event took place when some of the potatoes thrown at the farm were brought to Schonach. August Schneider's father, unwilling to keep them in the house, threw them into the fire. No sooner had this been done than E let out a loud scream in the living room. Schneider's sister, who rushed to assist her, was suddenly choked by an invisible force. Both later reported distinctly feeling hands around their throats. Only when other household members intervened did the terrifying grip release. Experienced occultists might interpret this incident as a consequence of destroying an object with an energetic attachment. Some theories suggest that objects can retain an odic imprint of a being, and their destruction may trigger violent reactions. When I was finally called to the farm, the manifestations had already subsided. My report is therefore based on the testimonies of numerous witnesses, all of whom are willing to swear under oath to their experiences. So, Paul, I gotta know what you think of that. That sounds like a poltergeist.
100%. Absolutely.
Have you seen this in other cases, though, where an item is destroyed and it has this kind of impact on the experiencer?
There are some cases where certain objects being destroyed or damaged either see a ramping up of the phenomena or a more focused haunting sort of guide in on one particular person more than they were. I mean, I was speaking with Ruth on my most recent episode, and she was on about a particularly haunted house where a psychic came round because they'd found some shoes in the walls when they were doing a renovation, and they'd already been saying that they'd got ghostly stuff going on. And for some reason, I think this psychic must have got their certificate from Temu. This psychic told them to chuck these shoes in a river, which I thought, well, they clearly don't know much about mythology and history and charms and protection, because when you find something like that here, you either put it back where you found it or you put it on display in the same building. You don't bin it, because we know what they're there for. And I find it hard that someone who claims to be so spiritually connected to the other side isn't aware of that or believes them to be cursed. And the irony is that once they removed the shoes, the haunting went through the roof and they sold up. So I'd be getting my money back.
This psychic sounds like one of these psychics who keep emailing us to try and get on the show. You know, like we had someone recently like, I'm actually a demon hunter. No, you're not. You're really not. You're not coming on my show.
I've seen that show on Netflix. No.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Vampire Hunter D for dickhead.
Yeah, we better off getting Sean Manchester on than that demon hunting dude.
Yeah, it's either demon hunters or psychics following us on Instagram and saying like, I can be on your show if you want. Oh, can you? Boy, I feel really lucky that blessed one 222 is willing to be on my show.
Yes, it's like those vaguely threatening sales pitches you get from podcast promotion groups, and I like to watch them go through the stages of excitement, bafflement, and anger as I just completely ignore everything they send me.
Yeah.
This is going to be the last time I email you. Good.
You promise?
Bye-bye. Go fuck yourself.
We get that sometimes with these kind of fake brand agencies who want us to like do paid content on the Instagram for like whatever thing they're shilling. But and I'm not above it, right? Like, again, if someone wants to pay us for a sponsored post, I'm open to it. But it's always comes from these really shady agencies that have absolutely no one's ever heard of them. You know, they've got one website and they mention all these high level clients, but these high level clients never mention working with them. And I think, no, thanks. I'm not gonna run an ad for your bingo game and then not get paid. Who do you think you are, HelloFresh? It's a little inside baseball between me and Paul there, folks, but yes. But Tord, thank you so much, man, for sending these in. And again, if you want to keep sending them, we would love to read them on the show. It's so fascinating because these cases are just things we would not have access to otherwise.
Appreciate your hard work, Tord. Thank you. Our next story is from Jen. Hey guys, Patreon has recently been showing older episodes of shows I follow, and I've just finished re-listening to old episodes to keep me distracted while I clean the house. I've just registered for episode 169, Death on the Doorstep, and I wanted to share just a weird but genuinely lovely experience I had whilst listening. I have to preface this with some necessary exposition, and I'm committed to getting through it without crying. On the 20th of May 2009, my best friend in the entire world died suddenly and unexpectedly of an undiagnosed heart condition scant months after his 31st birthday. We used to joke that I held his conscience and he held my soul, He was the most genuinely good and decent person I've ever known, and he made you feel like the most important person in the world, and you believed it when you were there with him. He was also unbelievably funny and could be known to take the piss out of people who were either arseholes or hurt his friends. Nothing malicious, just keenly observant. And he was always late to everything. Whenever I needed an ear, or even just to not be alone, no matter where we were in the world, I knew I could trust him to be there. When he died, his mother, through her own unimaginable grief, looked at me and said, "Oh, Jen, what are you going to do?" Because she knew he was my confidant, and I had very literally been what stood between me and the long goodbye. Whenever I'm going through something difficult, or have any life change, I reach for my phone, or more commonly now, I have a conversation with him in my head. I'm right now struggling with being an unwitting pawn in a political pissing match at work, and both sides, for whatever reason, have dangled unbelievable opportunities in my lap. I can't find the joy in them because I feel like I'm being offered a puppy out of the back of a rusty windowless van. Needless to say, I really need Mike, but hadn't really even thought about how much until I listened to this show. Brennan, at the beginning of the show, you recount two kids uttering what you thought was Bert and Dirt. Could they have been saying Dirt McGirt, aka the ODB? I immediately thought of Mikey, who would use that name in pub trivia, meeting decidedly condescending douchebags, or when introducing himself to assholes who couldn't answer the word no when we'd be out at the pub together. He would absolutely have used that cheerful but slightly sinister smiling voice when people would say, "Come again?" It made me smile. The last story about Harry was what really drove it home. Throughout the years, Mikey has made his presence known. I was pregnant with my daughter when Mikey passed. I'd only told him weeks before. I wound up in hospital with H1N1 when I was 40 weeks pregnant, and I didn't know at the time how dangerous it was, but I was soon to find out. After I was admitted, Mike's very devout Catholic mum called me to see how I was doing, and she wound up getting choked up and saying, "I hope she's born on November the 2nd, All Souls Day, because I will know he's okay." Fuck. No pressure then. After 2 days, I was deemed well enough to labour, and my doctor sent my husband home to get a good rest because he was going to introduce me in the morning, which would have been November the 3rd. They left and my nurses went on their break. Suddenly, all alone in a quarantine room, I felt what could only be described as if I was being Harry-carried from the inside out. I kept ringing for the charging nurse, but she refused to come in. It was just after 11 p.m, and I called my husband and told him to get his ass back. Then I paced, terrified, knowing something was dreadfully wrong. Right behind my right shoulder I heard, "Tighten up, Money," which was my nickname. "You're gonna be fine." And even through my pain I yelled at him, "You're always late. You always show up late, and then expect everything to get into full swing. You've had all day to give this to your mum. The fuck is wrong with you?" I felt that strong, silent presence I knew so well for what felt like ages, but it was only about 10 minutes. My husband and my nurses came in, and that presence backed away but never fully left. The nurses took charge, and I threatened their lives if they tried to make me push without an epidural. The anaesthetist was miraculously free and next door. He came in, tried to wait for my contraction to finish, and may or may not have been told some things about what would happen if he waited, and I sat stock still through the worst pain I'd ever experienced. I knew from looking at the nurses that I was in trouble. At 20 to 12, just 20 minutes shy of November the 3rd, Mike restored his beautiful mother's faith, something she holds so dear. I hemorrhaged, a placental abruption and a screta, and I bled out. I lost consciousness, and for an instant my heart stopped. That presence never once wavered, and I was not afraid for even a minute, because Mike made me a promise. One last little story to lighten things up. When my son was 2.5 years old, we found him in his Paul Pierce jersey, a gift from his Uncle Mikey, a pair of sunglasses and nothing else. Just Winnie the Poohing it in the living room, colouring in a basketball colouring book. My husband and I kind of laughed and said, "Hey, Quentin, what are you doing?" He said, "Who's Quentin?" "I'm Jams. Jams from Chicago." We burst out laughing. Later, though, I wondered, how does my Canadian toddler knows where Chicago is? And then I remembered. Along with his Dirt McGirt persona, in college some 10 years earlier, Mikey would also occasionally introduce himself as Jams, a Chicago DJ playing the best tunes from yesterday and today. Sorry this is so long, but I really, really needed Mikey today, and an episode from 2 years ago came into my feed, and you guys brought him to me.
Oh, Jen, I thank you for sharing that. I'm so happy that worked out the way it did. Of course, Jen, one of the listeners I've had the pleasure of meeting in person, and I'm happy that we could bring that to you.
God damn you, Jen, not much gets to me. I nearly broke down reading that.
Yeah, that's why I saved that one till almost the end of the show. Couldn't end on it, too sad, but almost the end.
It wasn't sad. I found it powerful, uplifting, heartwarming, wrapped in a bouquet of grief, but a beating heart of happiness pounded through it, and I could feel myself welling up at the end. So thanks, Jen. I don't think any story on this show has ever done that to me before. God damn you.
If it was going to be anyone's story, it'd be Jen.
It's what Mikey would have wanted, no doubt.
Exactly. And also, I love that he would fuck with people by calling himself Dirt McGirt. I think that's great. Jen, in response to your question, no, these kids were way too fucking young to know who or what a Dirt McGirt was. But those kids, I think they're just fucking me. I think it was a TikTok prank or something. I'm sure if I'd walked up close to them, they would have just fucking sprayed me with a seltzer bottle or something like that. But I'm pretty sure they were saying Bert and Gert because that was a whole stranger danger thing. Back, as I'm sure you'll remember, back in the day. But that was a lot of weird shit happened before I left Victoria. I was not in a very happy place, and I think I attracted a lot of very unhappy things. But no, Jen, thank you so much for sharing that with us. And again, it's funny. I wondered why people were liking old episodes. And again, Patreon must just be recommending things to people. Someone liked episode like 72 the other day. I was like, who the fuck is listening to episode 70 anything of this show? And apparently it's just Patreon. So thanks, Patreon, and thanks, Mike. Our final story of the night is from Miranda. Miranda says, "Hello, lovely folks. Despite my voracious appetite for stories of the paranormal, I've never had an unprovoked encounter with the unexplained. Unless you count the time a character in my dream knew I was asleep, when I myself did not. This happened years ago, and still gives me chills when I think about it. I'm pretty good about realizing I'm dreaming when the narrative of my dreams begin to go south, usually when they become frightening or stressful. Luckily, I've somehow trained my unconscious to question if what I'm experiencing is real when that happens. And at that point, the illusion is sufficiently cracked and I can pull myself out. This time, though, that wasn't the case. There was no reason to. I was at the back end of the discount retail store I'd worked in during college, and most of the overhead fluorescents were off for closing time. It was dark, but enough light remained to clearly see my surroundings. I was alone. Upon turning the corner and beginning my trek up the main aisle to the front of the store, I discovered that was not actually the case. An older woman, maybe in her 70s or so, was standing across the counter from one of the registers with a full shopping cart waiting to be checked out. Though overlooking a customer in the small store wouldn't have happened in real life, in this dream I felt only surprise and sympathy. I was remorseful that I wouldn't be able to help her, and I approached her to gently explain this. As I went about my spiel, the woman listened politely with a soft smile on her face. It's hard to explain, but as I spoke, her expression and body language seemed to suggest she was patiently waiting for me to finish talking, without the intention of participating in the narrative that was playing out. I finished speaking and she remained silent, maintaining eye contact with me. Another beat of silence passed, and I began to get the feeling that something was off. Just then the woman gently closed the space between us as she leaned in close to my ear and whispered softly, "There's a man in your room." I was jerked back into reality at breakneck speed as the dream's illusion had been completely, and incredibly to me, deliberately shattered. I woke with a start in my bed, safe. Christmas lights strung around my room still lit. It was the middle of the night. There was no threat, no man, as the woman had warned. Though I'm grateful I was in no real danger, I'm left utterly perplexed. The woman in my dream does not seem like an invention of my subconscious, as she held an awareness of reality independent of my own. Who was she? And what was her reason for ejecting me back into reality to face a danger that didn't exist? She has never returned, and I've never had another dream like that one. It felt very much like I was met by some kind of intelligence disguising itself into the setting of my dream to communicate directly with me. But why? The message didn't seem to serve a direct purpose, and yet it was incredibly effective in accomplishing what I can only imagine the woman hoped it would be, as I immediately awoke. I think of all the questions that remain, the following is the one I hate considering the most. Who was she trying to prevent from hearing by carefully whispering her message in my ear? And so Miranda also included some additional thoughts, which include some synchronicities. I'm going to save those for an upcoming Talk Spooky, because it's sort of about the length of that again and a little bit more. And I really kind of want to talk about this because this really freaked me out. But I don't think it was specifically what was said, because as you say, you woke up, there was no one in your room. But I think that she used a combination of words and proximity to jolt you out of a space. Now, again, we often talk on here about how dreams are quite often just your brain telling you something, right? It's like kind of like a conversation between you and your subconscious. I've been having a lot of them lately, and it's all just me working through stuff. Like I was working on a Fear Daily story. It's a third part in a series called The Mattress Fort. And I had a dream last night or the night before, where I was trying to lug a mattress across the 401 freeway in Los Angeles. And I kept thinking to myself, why the fuck am I doing this? This is dangerous and stupid. And I woke up and I realized, oh, it's because the mattress, I'm having a really hard time writing this particular story. I should just leave it for now and move on to do something else. And so that's what I've done. I've been working on other stuff. But this seems to me, there's something about this, and I could be totally off base, but something about this feels like a third party trying to eject you from a space before something else moves through it. That's the feeling I get. Like whatever this intelligence was, even if it was maybe part of you, although Miranda seems pretty certain it's not, I think you were somewhere. And I think the fact that the lights were off or starting to be off, but it's like you're not totally in the dark, but you're almost in the dark. And it's almost like there's something coming and they needed to get you out of there. So they told you what they needed to tell you to get you out. Do you think so too?
Yeah, definitely. Getting him out of the way.
Yeah. Yeah. Cause I feel like there's something about the proximity of having someone whisper it into your ear, maybe even more about, cause again, I don't think like hearing would work the same way in that space. So like, I don't think they would keep it down because, well, they're right nearby. Cause again, I don't think they were physically speaking to you, but I think the image of someone saying that right to your ear, cause you think about it, like there's a man in your room. Okay. That's fucked up. There's a man in your room. That shit's scary.
Yeah.
There's a power there that doesn't exist if you say it the other way.
There's a room in your man.
Now we're back to Clive Barker. I'll go get the bees.
No, you're right, though. You're right. I completely agree.
Yeah, because again, sometimes we'll read dreams accounts. I'm like, yeah, that feels like a dream, but an interesting dream. This one discomforted me in a way that is difficult to explain. Like how Jen's email sort of affected you on an emotional level, sort of like an affirming way. This was like ooh, I don't like that. So again, Miranda, thank you very much. And we will share your other thoughts on an upcoming Talk Spooky. Although I do want to say there is a PS here. You've mentioned that you worked in a grocery store once upon a time that your family owned. I know it will be disappointed, but I still vehemently hoped it was called The Store. And sadly, it was not. It was not called The Store.
There's a shop on a nearby road here that's called Steers Beers.
Okay, now that's clever. I like that.
You could have had a door shop, Stores Doors.
Nope. The other thing I just thought of is not a thing I can say. I don't know why that was the first thing I thought of, but anyways.
Stores Boars?
Yes, that's it. We were going to sell wild boars.
Interview the dullest people in the world.
or that, yep.
Welcome to Stores Balls. Or you could shout, shit lager, Stores Cause.
Well, we're going to sit here for about an hour and come up with more stores that I could have started if I was more entrepreneurial. But for now, we'll say thank you to everyone who wrote in. Thank you to everyone who shared their stories with us. We would love to hear your story. Send it to ghoststoryguys@gmail.com. Again, that's ghoststoryguys@gmail.com. You can send us your comments, your questions. Again, we would love to have your strange encounters. Doesn't have to be a ghost story. It can be a UFO story. It can be a strange dream, a precognitive experience, even a series of synchronicities. We would love to hear from you.
On that note, before we leave our beautiful listeners, I'm going to tell you an interesting fact I discovered this week.
Oh, please do.
So when Whitley Strieber released Communion, have a guess at how many people wrote to him about their experiences.
69.
Nope.
12. I give up.
200,000 people.
What? Jesus Christ. Where does that figure come from?
That was the letters that came. His wife dealt with all the correspondence. Annie.
Holy Christ.
And they've saved most of it. They're all in an archive. There's pictures and drawings of people, of what they experienced and what they saw and what their visitors looked like from all around the world.
200,000.
Yeah.
Wow. And so that so puts a lie to the people who say, like, well, it all started with him.
Yeah.
Wow.
His book was the catalyst.
That's incredible.
It's also incredible that the same week that hit number one, Bud Hopkins's book was number 5 on the New York bestsellers book.
Oh, no shit.
Yeah. So they were 2 top 5 books talking about abduction. What a time to be alive.
Take me back.
Yeah. But yeah, that blew my mind. 200,000 people.
Wow. Well, if you are one of those 200,000 or the hundreds of thousands since who have seen, again, had a strange experience, seen a predatory gray. That's actually another scene that freaked me out, is the one in Communion where Christopher Walken is talking to the alien behind the door.
Yeah.
Where at first you can't see anything, but he says, come out, I know you're there. Still creeps me out. Didn't like the movie generally, but that scene has that left an impression.
It's very creepy, especially with it being set at Christmas. It's not the kind of Christmas film I want to watch often, but I do watch it.
Of course you do. Little light Christmas watching.
Hey, it's up there with, Silent Night, Deadly Night.
Classic.
Black Christmas.
Another good one. One of the few films where all 3 versions are pretty good. Not all as good as the original, of course, but all 3 are pretty good.
Yeah, like My Bloody Valentine.
Yes. Yes.
Ironically.
Speaking of which, actually, I saw Hard Eyes last week, and holy shit, is that good.
Ah, excellent.
Written by one of the co-writers, was also the writer of your favorite film, It's a Wonderful Knife. So I'm sure that'll be high on
I refuse to believe that anybody other than a room full of monkeys wrote that film. It was so bereft of any redeeming quality, that film, that I refuse to believe a human being was involved in any part of that process.
If the makers of It's a Wonderful Knife are listening, I liked your movie.
I fucking hated it. One of the worst horror films I've seen this century. And I've seen some shit.
Well, sit with that if you made It's a Wonderful Knife, and we'll be back in a few minutes. Hey there, listeners. Before you reach for that skip 15 seconds ahead button, I promise you this isn't an ad. We wanted to take a minute to talk to you about mental health. On this show, I've always tried to be as honest and open as possible about my struggles with depression and anxiety, because even though we've come a long way towards acknowledging the very real damage these things can do, there is still way too much lingering stigma about reaching out for help. And when you start to feel like there's no help, it's easy to start feeling like there's no hope. But Paul has joined me today to remind you there is always hope and there's always help.
We're not going to try and talk you out of self-harming right now, because we know that's not how it works. Instead, what we wanted to do was tell you something now and hope that should things get bad, you'll remember it and make a phone call or send a text message before you make any permanent decisions. As someone who knows all too well just how important mental health can be, it's never too late to reach out.
In Canada, the number to call is 133-456-4566.
In the USA, the new number to call is 988. That's 988.
In the UK, the number to call is 116123 or text SHOUT, that's SHOUT, to 85258. In Australia, the number to call is 131114.
However bad shit seems, it will pass. And no matter what your brain might be telling you at any given moment, and believe me when I say I know this intimately, there are people who love you and people who care deeply about how you treat yourself. Should a time come when you find yourself despairing, please know that we've both been where you are, and there is a way back to the world. Take care.
Welcome back. The Ghost Story Guys are Luke Greensmith, who helps find our stories. He's also host of the Luke Lore podcast, available everywhere fine podcasts live. Tanya Downing, who manages our Facebook community. Sarah Kent, who manages our Reddit community.
Our paranormal cupid firing arrows of supernatural scares at us is Mr. Brennan Storr.
And of course, my friend and co-host is the one, the only, the inimitable Paul Bestel, the paranormal Johnny Carson himself, host of Mysteries and Monsters. Paul, what's coming up on M&M?
I've got the marvellous Gail DeVos, who is a fellow Canadian, joining me as we dive into some urban legends and some of the strange tales that have still permeate every corner of the world, regardless of the fact we may think we've heard them all before.
Very cool. And where can everyone find you online?
You can find Mysteries and Monsters across most social media platforms and podcast sites.
Fabulous. I'm Largely the Truth on Threads, Instagram, Blue Sky, and Letterboxd. You can find my horror fiction show, Fear Daily, everywhere fine podcasts live. As we said at the top of the show, if you want to support us, head to patreon.com/ghoststoryguys. That's patreon.com/ghoststoryguys. We have tiers starting at the $1 level, gets you an ad-free feed, and from there you get bonus shows, extra conversations between me and Paul, our monthly live stream, and so much more. Again, that's all at patreon.com/ghoststoryguys, or you can sign up to become a friend of the cabin via Apple Podcasts or YouTube. Paul, my friend, any guest spots coming up?
I might be on more shows than you can shake a stick at in the next few weeks. I've got about 3 that are about to be confirmed on top of the one I've just done with Jason Hewlett. So March, people will either be really happy or absolutely sick to the back teeth of hearing me talk shit.
I refuse to believe the latter could ever be true. So,
so once I know, I shall update you all.
Very cool. Keep an eye on our socials. We'll post links as they become available. If you want to pick up some Ghost Story Guys merch, head to our website at ghoststoryguys.com. We have all kinds of cool stuff there. We also have full show notes there, so you can find full show notes for every episode at ghoststoryguys.com. Our theme song, Radio, Into the Darkness We Go, is composed and performed by Peter Kursov of Pizzanta Music. Find more from him by searching for Pizzanta Music wherever you stream your tunes. And I think that's going to do it.
We'll be back next week, but until then,
Into the darkness we go.
Patron has really been... Okay, now. That was a good start. 3 words in and I fell to fucking pieces. Have you swallowed a kayak yet?
Oh, I'm not going to tell you about
that. Those days are behind me.
That's right. Yeah, it's a different time. I had bills to pay. I mean, I still got bills to pay.
Nobody knew what OnlyFans was.
That's right. Only Brens.
Only Brens.
So can you imagine? No. I don't care. I don't care, man. That's like great, I guess. Congratulations. I'm happy you're happy with the show you made, but like he's an actor in LA. He wants to keep getting work. He's going to kiss your ass as much as you need to be kissed.
Good, Chris. What's it? Very claggy.
Claggy.
Like, stick all your mouth out.
Oh, yeah. 100%.
And all your fingers turn orange.
Yeah, the curse of the Cheeto curse.
It's like being in Ibiza in 1996.
And I'm in Cheetos. Anyways, we should probably record the show. I'm not ignoring her to impress you. I just don't like her. Oh.
What's that? That's the psychic shithouse alarm. The trouble we have in 8 watchers is you don't know which fucker's going off.
I don't have one watch, so
I've got one and I can't find it. It goes off at 3 minutes past 9 every morning. I've no idea where the fucking thing is.